It was exactly 7:12 a.m., the kind of quiet morning where the sky is soft blue, the neighborhood still half asleep, and the steam from my coffee curls gently into the cool air. I stepped out onto my front porch expecting a peaceful start to the day. But peace wasn't on the schedule, because right there, leaning over the driver's side door of my truck like she was diffusing an explosive device, was HOA Karen. Her body was hunched forward in full concentration, her elbow jerking aggressively as she tried to twist a shiny brass master key into my truck's lock. The metal scraped loudly against the door, the kind of sound that instantly sets your teeth on edge. I froze for a second, stunned by the ridiculousness of what I was seeing. Before I could even say a word, she spun around dramatically, her eyes wide with self-righteous fury. "Why won't this master key open your car? This is a violation." She practically barked the words at me. I blinked, still waking up, trying to process the fact that a random HOA president was attempting to break into my truck at sunrise like she had federal clearance. She shoved the key into the lock again, twist, 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 until it slipped out of her hand and clattered to the ground. And that's when her next move left me speechless. Without a second of hesitation, she straightened her posture, whipped out her phone, and dialed 911 right in front of me. 911. Because her magical key didn't open my truck, she pointed at me dramatically as if she'd just caught a fugitive fleeing the scene. "Hello?" "Yes, I'm reporting a non-compliant male who is preventing a mandatory HOA safety inspection on his vehicle." Non-compliant male? Mandatory inspection on my truck? I swear I could have laughed out loud. And the best part? The non-compliant male she was calling 911 on was the county sheriff, me. But she didn't know that yet, and trust me, she was about to learn it the hard way. But this situation didn't just appear out of nowhere. This showdown had been building for years, ever since the day I moved into this quiet cul-de-sac at the edge of the HOA's territory. My house sat right on the border of their jurisdiction, close enough for Karen to stare at it, far enough that she had zero authority over anything I owned, and that single technicality was the biggest thorn in her entire personality. The very first time she introduced herself, she didn't say hello. She didn't welcome me to the neighborhood. No. She strutted up my driveway with a clipboard tucked under her arm like she was marching into a courtroom. She pointed at my patrol cruiser parked in my driveway and said, "Law enforcement vehicles may cause unnecessary alarm. You'll need to park that elsewhere." It took me a full second to process the absurdity. I told her politely. The cruiser was legally parked, legally registered, and completely outside her HOA jurisdiction. She gave me a tight smile, one of those smiles that never touches the eyes, scribbled something on her clipboard, and walked away like she was filing a report on me. And that was only the warm-up. A few days later, I found a paper taped to the windshield of my cruiser, in bold letters, unauthorized government imagery visible from public view, $45 fine, government imagery. She meant the sheriff's badge printed on the door. I laughed so hard I nearly choked. I peeled it off, stuck it in a binder, and kept going with my day. Back then, I had no idea how thick that binder would become or how many labels I'd have to make for the nonsense violations she manufactured. Over the next year, I collected fake citations she printed at home, complaints about visual intimidation, accusations of reflective surface aggression, and even a fine for leaving tire tracks on my own driveway after it rained. But the moment that truly pushed her obsession over the edge, the moment she switched from annoying to determined dictator, was when she demanded a copy of my car keys for HOA emergency access. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "Absolutely not." She blinked, shocked, like she'd never been told no in her entire life. Then she lifted her chin and said, "We'll revisit this." I should have known that was the calm before the storm, because now, on this ridiculous morning, she was standing at my truck jabbing a master key at the door, calling 911 on me, demanding access she would never legally have. And soon. Very soon. When Karen called 911 on me, I didn't react. I simply stood there with my coffee in one hand and watched her pace in circles like she was directing a tactical operation. She kept pointing at my truck, her voice rising as she tried to convince the dispatcher that I was some kind of criminal mastermind refusing a mandatory vehicle inspection. The irony was almost artistic. Within minutes, a patrol car rolled up the street, tires crunching softly on the pavement. It was Deputy Ray, one of my guys, someone who knew my house, knew my truck, and knew exactly how mornings went for me. Karen rushed toward him like she had finally found her savior. There, that truck, that man, he refused HOA access and he's hiding something highly suspicious, she shrieked, waving her arms so wildly she nearly slapped the side mirror off Ray's cruiser. Ray gave her that polite law enforcement smile, the one we reserve for situations like this. He turned to me. Morning, Sheriff. Karen froze. Her neck did a slow mechanical turn toward me, like a robot whose programming had just crashed. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed, then opened again. She looked like she was buffering. Ray continued, deciding to twist the knife just a little. We got a call about a non-compliant male. I'm guessing that's you? Karen made a choking sound somewhere between outrage and disbelief. She stared at me like the universe had personally betrayed her by assigning me a badge. You're the sheriff? She stammered. I nodded casually. Last time I checked. The silence that followed was priceless. A silent, heavy, stunned moment where every shred of authority she thought she had evaporated into thin air. But embarrassment wasn't enough to stop Karen. She straightened her blouse, lifted her chin, and tried to recover. Well, sheriff or not, HOA emergency regulations require all residents to provide vehicle access keys. It's for community safety. She said it with the confidence of someone quoting state law, even though she was spouting pure fiction. Ray raised an eyebrow. Ma'am, no HOA in the state has that kind of authority. Karen refused to blink. Ours does. No, he repeated calmly. It doesn't. Her face twitched. She wasn't used to being corrected, definitely not by someone in uniform. She folded her arms tightly and tried to redirect her frustration. This truck is causing instability in the neighborhood, she snapped. Look at it. Large. Intimidating. Too reflective. It violates the spirit of our visual harmony. Ray looked at me as if asking silently, Is she serious? She was. Dead serious. He sighed. Ma'am, you can't force entry into someone's vehicle and you can't call 911 because your key won't fit. Karen gasped as if he had insulted her bloodline. I called 911 because he refused mandatory access. This is a safety protocol. Ray shook his head. There's no such protocol. I thought that would be the end of it, that she'd finally retreat to her house, stomp around for a few minutes, and maybe write an angry email that I'd save in my binder under Creative Nonsense Volume 3. But Karen didn't retreat. Karen didn't even slow down. She jabbed a finger at me. This is not over. The community will not tolerate disobedience. She snatched her brass master key, huffed loudly, and stormed off down the driveway like she was marching into battle. Ray watched her leave, then looked back at me. You good? Always, I said. But we both knew this was far from over, because if there was one thing Karen hated more than being wrong, it was being embarrassed. And now the woman had been embarrassed in front of a deputy, in front of me, and probably in front of every neighbor who had peeked through their blinds. I finished my coffee while Ray headed back to his cruiser. He gave me a small nod before driving off. The street returned to its quiet morning stillness. Birds chirped, a sprinkler clicked on somewhere, a dog barked in the distance. For one brief moment the world felt normal again, but Karen wasn't done, not even close. She disappeared for the rest of the morning, but I knew that silence wasn't peace. Karen never rested. After humiliation, she stewed, she spiraled, she plotted, and by the next day she unleashed her retaliation. Bright pink flyers appeared on every mailbox, every lamppost, and even taped to the side of the community trash bins. Flyers covered in glitter glue and dramatic capital letters, accusing my truck of being a community threat. She wasn't trying to enforce rules anymore. She was trying to start a movement against my truck, against me, against the sheriff she didn't know she had picked a fight with. And that was the moment I realized Karen wasn't just unreasonable, she was escalating. Karen's reaction to being corrected by law enforcement didn't fade, it fermented. By the next sunrise, her revenge campaign had officially begun. When I opened my front door at 6:15 a.m., the entire street looked like a preschool craft project gone feral. Neon pink flyers fluttered from mailboxes, fence posts, garbage bins, anything with a surface. Some were taped so aggressively they looked stapled. The headline screamed from every direction. Stop the non-compliant vehicle. Under it was a distorted, zoomed-in photo of my truck taken from an angle suggesting she had practically laid on the sidewalk to capture it. The image quality was so bad the license plate looked like a barcode. The flyer listed accusations in bullet point form, each one sounding more unhinged than the last. Poses a visual disturbance, creates reflection hazards, violates community emotional comfort, refuses mandatory key protocol and potential threat indicator. Karen hadn't just made a complaint, she'd drafted a manifesto. My neighbor Mark shuffled up the sidewalk, holding one of the flyers like it was radioactive. His hair was a mess, his slippers mismatched. "Please tell me this isn't about you," he muttered. "Apparently it is," I said. "She's lost it," he sighed. "Last week she fined me because my car was too red, said it was visually aggressive." "Too red?" I repeated. Mark nodded miserably. "Bright colors disturb the neighborhood's emotional balance." I couldn't help it. I laughed. But Mark didn't. "To be honest," he said, "it's not funny anymore. She's escalating on everyone. You're just her favorite target." That was the first hint that Karen's power trip wasn't confined to me. She had been quietly experimenting on the neighbors long before she tried breaking into my truck. My binder was about to get a lot thicker. By noon I had found 3 more notices tucked under my truck's windshield. Unauthorized law enforcement symbols, reflective surface disturbance, excessive driveway presence, excessive presence. In my own driveway, I added every single one to the binder. Later that day, an email circulated through the neighborhood. Subject line, emergency HOA meeting, mandatory attendance. Someone forwarded it to me within minutes. When the recording of that meeting finally reached my phone, I sat back on the couch and pressed play out of pure curiosity, expecting a few minutes of Karen lecturing about community standards. What I got instead was a full-scale performance. Karen stood at the front of a community room decorated with posters of flowers and children's drawings from some unrelated event. Behind her was a projector screen displaying a slide titled Neighborhood Threat Overview. The first slide showed a giant pie chart. My truck was the largest slice, over half the circle, labeled Source of Instability. Karen spoke with dramatic pauses, pacing like she was presenting a national security briefing. "This vehicle," she declared, tapping the screen so hard the projector wobbled, "has repeatedly disrupted our aesthetic unity. Its owner has refused to comply with established access guidelines essential for emergency preparedness." There were only 7 people in the room, and they all looked trapped. She clicked to the next slide, a blurry photo of my truck taken from a weird angle, with a shadow stretched across the pavement. "Observe," she said. "The shadow cast by this vehicle is unbalanced, asymmetrical, and encroaches on the driveway of the neighboring property. This kind of shadow behavior is a classic indicator of non-compliant use." Someone in the back whispered, "What the hell is shadow behavior?" Karen ignored it. The next slide was titled Potential Threat Indicators. Below it, size, color, reflectiveness, authority, symbolism. Owner non-compliance. One elderly resident raised her hand timidly. "Isn't that the sheriff's truck?" Karen snapped around. "Authority does not excuse non-compliance." Another resident murmured, "But he's literally the sheriff." Karen's jaw tightened. She clicked to the next slide without acknowledging the comment. The final image showed a mock-up of some kind of HOA vehicle regulation system, a row of cars with identical keys labeled Universal Access Protocol. She didn't say it outright, but her meaning was clear. She wanted keys to everyone's car. Watching her present these slides with the confidence of a seasoned politician told me everything I needed to know. This was no longer about rules, this was personal. But Karen wasn't just irrational, she was determined to force compliance, even though my house wasn't actually under her HOA jurisdiction at all. I lived just outside the boundary, a technicality that she had always hated. And now she was acting like that boundary didn't exist. By the next morning, 3 new notices appeared on my truck, each more ridiculous than the last. Driveway shadow imbalance, unauthorized sheriff insignia, reflection, hazard violation, reflection, hazard violation. My chrome grille was apparently too shiny for her worldview. That's when I realized something important. Karen wasn't trying to enforce rules. She was trying to assert dominance over me, over the street, over an area she didn't even legally control, And when people like Karen feel their authority slipping, they don't calm down. They double down, which meant one thing. She was building toward a bigger confrontation, something louder, something public, something she thought would put me in my place once and for all. She had already tried the key, already tried the flyers, already tried the meeting, which meant whatever came next was going to be her boldest move yet, and she had no idea she was walking straight into a legal disaster. The day Karen decided to escalate from harassment to full-blown delusion started like any other, quietly, uneventfully, deceptively calm. For a few rare hours, I honestly thought she might have tired herself out. No flyers littering the mailbox, no new notices taped to my truck, no glitter-covered lectures about visual harmony. It was almost suspicious. By late afternoon, the neighborhood felt unusually still. Even the usual joggers and dog walkers seemed to be avoiding the street, as if they sensed another storm forming, and they were right. Around 5 p.m., I stepped outside to grab a package, only to see an unfamiliar sight at the end of the cul-de-sac. Karen, standing beside two giant folding tables covered in binders, charts, markers, a megaphone, and a stack of freshly printed pamphlets. It looked like she was hosting a political rally for one. Several curious neighbors stood nearby, not close enough to join, but too intrigued to leave. Karen straightened her blazer, a white one she usually saved for what she considered official HOA business, and cleared her throat loudly, tapping the megaphone with unnecessary authority. "Attention, residents," she said, even though she didn't actually need the megaphone to address 10 people. Today marks a turning point in our community governance. I froze halfway down my driveway. She wasn't done harassing me. She had upgraded to staging a public spectacle. Karen grabbed a stack of pamphlets and began distributing them with a forced smile that looked like she practiced it in the mirror. The pamphlets had a dramatic cover, my truck parked peacefully in my driveway, surrounded by red arrows pointing at completely normal features. Below the image was the title, Comprehensive Report on Community Safety Threats. Neighbors accepted the pamphlets cautiously, their expressions ranging from confused to exhausted. Mark, who had clearly been dragged out by his wife, muttered under his breath, "Oh, God, she made a booklet." Karen clapped her hands sharply. "If you'll all gather around," she announced, "we are implementing a mandatory multi-phase protocol to ensure safety, unity, and emotional consistency within our neighborhood." Emotional consistency, that was a new one, even for her. She flipped open the first binder, revealing color-coded tabs like she was unveiling state secrets. "In Phase 1, she said proudly, we begin the implementation of the Vehicle Transparency Initiative." I blinked. That was not a phrase a sane person would invent. Karen gestured dramatically toward a laminated chart showing diagrams of cars with keys taped next to them. "This initiative will require every resident to provide a copy of their vehicle key to the HOA for emergency access purposes." A few neighbors exchanged alarmed glances. Someone coughed awkwardly. Then she continued, undeterred. "In Phase 2, we begin the drive-by assessments during which each vehicle will be evaluated for compliance, color harmony, reflective balance, shadow impact, and overall emotional footprint." I nearly choked. Emotional footprint. Even for Karen, this was record-breaking nonsense. A brave older man raised his hand. "Is any of this legal?" he asked. Karen turned toward him with a tight smile that radiated condescension. "The HOA has full authority to regulate community appearance," she said. "Our bylaws clearly state that aesthetic disruptions may be corrected through decisive action." "But you don't run the whole neighborhood," he pointed out. "Some homes aren't even under your HOA." Her smile froze. Everyone knew he was talking about me. Everyone knew she hated that. Karen lifted the megaphone to her mouth like she was about to deliver the State of the Union. "That brings us," she said, "to Phase 3. She held up a large envelope stamped with a fake-looking logo she clearly designed herself. Bold letters on the front read, "Community Enforcement Grand Order." I could practically feel the self-importance radiating off her. Karen raised the envelope high, letting everyone see it. "This," she declared, "is the official neighborhood order. It declares that all vehicles, regardless of owner, occupation, or jurisdiction, must submit to universal HOA access standards." Her gaze moved toward my driveway like a slow-moving spotlight. My enforcement actions today, she continued, will ensure that we restore visual harmony and emotional stability to this community. I felt my jaw tightening. She wasn't just handing out flyers anymore. She was publicly declaring her authority over property she didn't control, over a sheriff's truck she had already tried to break into. Karen then made a grand gesture toward my driveway like she was leading a parade. We will begin with the most disruptive vehicle first. The crowd audibly reacted. Some gasped softly, some stepped back, some looked like they wished they had stayed inside. Mark whispered, "She's not really going towards your truck again, right? She can't be that stupid." "Oh, she is," I said, and she was already marching toward my property line, pamphlets in hand, binder tucked under her arm, determination radiating from every step. The moment she crossed onto my driveway, territory completely outside the HOA's reach, the neighbors sucked in a collective breath. Even they knew she was trespassing. Karen stopped right in front of my truck, placed one hand dramatically on the hood like a detective claiming evidence, and announced, "In accordance with the new emergency order, I hereby declare this vehicle officially seized for compliance review." Seized. She actually said seized. Before I could take a single step toward her, she pulled out another brass key, different from the first one, and said loudly, "This one better work." She pushed it into the door lock. The metal scraped. The lock resisted. Her face hardened. She tried again, harder, twisting, jamming, forcing it like she had practiced. "Come on," she hissed. "Open!" A neighbor gasped. Another whispered, "Hi, she's breaking into a sheriff's vehicles again." Karen didn't hear a thing. She was too focused, too determined, too far gone. Then came the moment that would change everything. She ripped the key back out, stepped away from the truck, snatched her phone from her pocket, and dialed 911 like she had been waiting for this chance. And with absolute confidence, she said, "Yes, I'm reporting a dangerous, non-compliant vehicle. I need immediate police assistance." She paused, glancing smugly at the small crowd. "This time," she added, "they'll have no choice but to enforce my authority." She had no idea who the dispatcher was speaking to, no idea what she had just confessed to, no idea she had crossed a line she couldn't ever walk back over. I stood there in silence, letting the weight of her mistake settle over the entire street. Karen wanted enforcement. She was about to get it. Just not the kind she expected. The sound of distant sirens started faint but grew louder with every passing second. You could feel the entire neighborhood tense up as the flashing lights turned onto our street. But Karen looked thrilled. She actually straightened her blazer and smoothed her hair like she was about to receive an award. "There," she whispered, smiling at the approaching patrol cars. "Finally, someone who will listen." I stood with my arms crossed, watching her confidence grow with every blink of those red and blue lights. Neighbors edged to the sidewalk, suddenly invested in witnessing whatever disaster Karen had just engineered for herself. 2 patrol cars rolled to a stop, quietly, deliberately, far calmer than the situation deserved. The officers stepped out, recognizing me instantly. Their expressions shifted the moment they noticed Karen standing with her pamphlets, binder, megaphone, and the mess of her so-called community enforcement order scattered across my driveway. Karen marched forward before anyone could speak. "Officers!" she called, waving dramatically as if summoning them. "Thank you for arriving so quickly. The situation is urgent." One officer glanced at me. I just nodded slightly, silently telling him, "You need to hear this yourself." Karen pointed at my truck with a sweeping motion. "That vehicle is a safety hazard," she declared. "Non-compliant, illegally parked, and completely out of aesthetic alignment with our community guidelines. I attempted to perform a lawful HOA inspection, but the owner has refused all regulation." The officer blinked. Once. Twice. "You tried to perform a what?" he asked. "A lawful HOA inspection," she repeated, louder as if volume would make it real. "We are in phase 3 of enforcement protocol. I have documentation." She shoved a thick binder toward the officer. He didn't take it. "And how exactly," he asked carefully, "did you attempt to inspect the vehicle?" Karen lifted her chin proudly. "I tried 2 different master keys," she said. "Neither worked. So I need you to force the owner to surrender his proper key so we can complete the compliance check." Silence. Pure, heavy, stunned silence. A neighbor coughed. Someone else muttered, "Oh my God." The officer looked at me again, then back at Karen. "You tried keys," he said slowly, "to a vehicle that doesn't belong to you?" "Yes," she said confidently. "As the elected HOA president." "No, you're not," Mark called from the sidewalk. "You got voted out last year." Karen spun around with a glare, then continued talking as if he hadn't spoken. "As the rightful community authority," she insisted, "I have jurisdiction to enforce visual, emotional, and functional harmony standards. This truck violates all three." The officer couldn't hold it in anymore. "Ma'am," he said, "this is a sheriff's vehicle." Karen nodded sharply. "Yes, and it's a nuisance. It's been mocking our aesthetic regulations for months." The officer stared at her like she had grown a second head. "It's a law enforcement vehicle," he repeated, "legally parked, with full exemption from HOA guidelines, and it belongs to him." He pointed directly at me. Karen's face twitched. Just a small spasm, but enough for everyone to see the crack in her confidence. "No," she said, shaking her head like a malfunctioning robot. "He's not in the HOA. That means he can't override our rules." "That means," the officer corrected, "you have zero authority over him." Karen blinked rapidly. "That's not how it works," she insisted, flipping open her binder and shoving papers at the officer. "Look at Section A, subsection 2, paragraph 9. All vehicles within visual proximity must adhere to HOA-approved standards." "That's something you wrote," Mark added, "on your printer yesterday." A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd, but Karen snapped. "This is a legally binding order," she yelled, waving the fake community enforcement grand order envelope over her head. "I demand this vehicle be seized until it complies." "Ma'am," the officer said firmly, "the only one who attempted to seize anything today was you." Her jaw tightened, her eyes narrowed, her grip on the envelope tightened until the paper creased. "I called 911, she said weakly, "to enforce my authority." The officer nodded. "Yes, and that's why we're here. The dispatcher relayed everything you said on the phone." I watched Karen's face freeze in slow motion. "Everything," she whispered. He nodded again. "Everything, including you admitting that you tried multiple keys on a vehicle that isn't yours. That's attempted unlawful entry." Karen's breathing changed. Quick, shallow, panicked. "No," she said, voice cracking. No, you don't understand. I'm the one who called for help. I'm the authority. I'm the victim here." The officer stepped closer. "You called to report a crime," he said calmly. "But it turns out the only person committing one was you." Her hands shook. "This isn't happening," she whispered. "This is a misunderstanding. This is my street. My HOA." The officer gestured toward the binder, the cracked key, the flyers, the stolen-looking envelope. "Ma'am, you trespassed, attempted illegal entry on a government-issued vehicle, and tried to present fraudulent documents as legal authority." Karen's last thread of composure snapped. "You can't arrest me," she shouted. "I made this neighborhood. I protect it from chaos. I protect it from people like—" She pointed at me, eyes wild, "and like him." The officer cut her off gently but firmly. "Ma'am, turn around for me." Her head jerked back. "What? No, you can't. Turn around." Panic exploded across her face. Neighbors whispered. Birds scattered from a nearby tree. The entire street held its breath as Karen realized none of her imaginary authority could save her now. After one final shaky moment of resistance, she turned. The officer placed her hands behind her back. The click of the handcuffs echoed across the neighborhood like closure. Karen stared straight ahead, stunned, humiliated, defeated. As the officer read her rights, her binder closed, her fake order fluttered to the ground. Her megaphone rolled down the driveway like a sad, defeated symbol of all her imagined power. And as they walked her toward the patrol car, she whispered one last desperate sentence. "This isn't over. I'm still in charge." But everyone knew. It was over. The neighborhood was never truly quiet, but after Karen's arrest, it felt like the air had changed. People stepped outside with the cautious curiosity of wildlife emerging after a storm. Whispers drifted from porch to porch. "Did you see it? Did they really take her? What happens now?" I stood in my driveway for a moment, watching the patrol car disappear down the street with Karen in the back seat, her face pale, eyes wide, her self-invented authority collapsing around her like a sand castle in a rising tide. But the story didn't end there, not even close. Because everything she had done, every fake notice, every forged legal document, every illegal attempt to access neighbors' property, was now officially part of a real investigation, and I was no longer dealing with her as a frustrated neighbor. I was dealing with her as the sheriff. Within an hour, 2 additional patrol cars arrived to take statements from neighbors, people who had been too intimidated to speak up before suddenly found their courage. She tried to fine me for the angle of my mailbox. She inspected my garden without permission. She told me my dog barked in a non-regulation tone. She threatened to tow my car because it sat too confidently. She told me she had copies of all our house keys. That last one turned several heads, including mine. Copies? I asked. Mark nodded nervously. She claimed it was standard HOA safety protocol, said she stored them in an authorized emergency access chamber. I raised an eyebrow. Where exactly was this chamber? Mark shrugged. She said she couldn't reveal the location because it was classified. Wonderful. Karen wasn't just power-hungry. She was operating an entire imaginary government. For the next hour, I walked the street with 2 deputies collecting the mountain of materials Karen had unleashed. Bright pink flyers, fake violations printed on glitter paper, repurposed envelopes labeled official order, a stack of letters written in language so dramatic it felt like she was impersonating a medieval queen issuing decrees. But the strangest piece came from an elderly neighbor named Mrs. Powell. She handed me a thick sealed envelope. She gave me this last week, she said. Told me to keep it safe, said it contained the Master HOA Treaty. I opened it carefully. Inside was a 12-page manifesto titled The Future Laws of Karen's Community Dominion. It included mandatory HOA loyalty badges, weekly vehicle compliance parades, a universal curfew, and a requirement that all neighbors submit spare keys for proper oversight. It would have been funny if it hadn't been so unsettling. Karen wasn't abusing HOA power. She was building her own imaginary empire. And she genuinely believed when I arrived at the station later that afternoon, Karen was sitting in the interview room, arms crossed, lips tight, posture rigid like a monarch refusing to acknowledge defeat. She looked up when I walked in and her expression hardened. "You," she hissed. "This is your fault. You provoked this." I sat across from her. "You tried to break into a law enforcement vehicle," I said calmly. "You forged legal documents. You misused emergency services. You attempted to impose authority you don't have." "That's because nobody would listen," she snapped, "and someone had to maintain order. Someone had to enforce community discipline. You undermined everything." "Karen," I said, "you don't have jurisdiction over my property, or any property outside your HOA. You know that." "I should have jurisdiction," she said bitterly. "People need structure, rules, leadership." "Leadership doesn't mean controlling people," I replied. "It means serving them, supporting them, not forcing them to hand over their keys." She leaned back, shaking her head. "You don't understand. This neighborhood was falling apart. Unregulated vehicles, unofficial decorations, shadow imbalances. You were a threat to community harmony." I almost laughed, but her eyes were wild enough that I didn't. "Karen," I said carefully, "you created an entire alternate legal system." She lifted her chin, "and it was working." "No," I said softly, "it wasn't." For the first time her voice cracked. "They need me," she whispered. "Without me, this place will fall apart. They just don't know it yet." But she could see the truth in the silence that followed. Nobody needed her. Nobody feared her anymore. Her power had been built on intimidation, and the moment the spell broke, it vanished completely. Charges filed. Karen was eventually released, pending official charges, but the list was long. Attempted unlawful entry, misuse of emergency services, harassment, trespassing, creating fraudulent legal documents, interfering with law enforcement property, and, depending on what else was uncovered, possibly more. When she returned home that evening, escorted by a deputy, the neighborhood watched from a distance. No one greeted her, no one supported her, no one treated her like an authority figure anymore. Her imaginary empire had collapsed in a single day. The neighborhood without her. The HOA board held an emergency meeting the next morning, this time a real one. They officially removed Karen from all positions. They nullified every fake rule she had created. They issued an apology to the entire community. Neighbors talked to each other more openly. People walked their dogs without fear of unsolicited compliance inspections. Cars parked normally. Mailboxes breathed easier. The street felt lighter. And for the first time in months, I enjoyed my morning coffee without worrying about a surprise violation taped to my door. But Karen wasn't done. A week later, I found one last envelope on my doorstep. No glitter this time, no fake stamps, just shaky handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper. You may have won temporarily, but true order will return. Karen, I folded the note, placed it in the binder with all the others, and closed it for good. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is recognize a battle that doesn't deserve another second of your time. Karen's self-made empire had finally crumbled, not because of force, but because the truth always outlasts delusion. And my truck, still parked in the same driveway, still shining, still perfectly, legally, gloriously non-compliant with every imaginary rule she ever created. For a few peaceful weeks, it seemed like everything had finally settled. Karen was removed from the HOA board, her fake policies shredded, her glitter-covered violations tossed straight into recycling bins across the neighborhood. People laughed again, kids played outside without being accused of unauthorized recreational noise. Cars sat proudly in their driveways without neon pink warnings taped to their mirrors. Life returned to normal, but Karen never accepted normal, not for a second. One evening, just after sunset, I saw her walking slowly down the sidewalk. She wasn't carrying clipboards or flyers, no glitter, no self-proclaimed authority radiating from her posture. Just a worn-out woman dragging a small-wheeled suitcase behind her. She didn't look powerful anymore. She looked tired, like someone whose entire identity had been built on control, and now there was nothing left to control. She stopped at the edge of my driveway. We stared at each other for a long moment. Then she said softly, "You ruined everything." I didn't respond. There was nothing to respond to. Karen hadn't lost because of me. She lost because she pushed everyone too far, even herself. She glanced at my truck, the same truck she'd once called a vehicular threat to neighborhood harmony. "That thing," she muttered bitterly, "destroyed my community." "No," I said calmly. "You destroyed your own reputation." She swallowed hard. "You don't understand. I was trying to protect them from chaos." I stepped closer, "And in doing so, you became the chaos." She flinched like the words hit her physically. Karen lowered her voice. "The HOA, they banned me. Permanently. I'm not allowed to attend meetings, not even as a resident." "That's what happens when you create rules that don't exist," I said. She stared at the ground. "They're selling my house," she whispered. "Forced sale. I have 30 days to leave." That part surprised even me, but apparently Karen hadn't just forged notices. She had also been using HOA funds for her ridiculous emergency access initiatives. Thousands of dollars unaccounted for, fraud, misuse of funds, breach of fiduciary duty. The HOA board came down harder on her than law enforcement did. Karen wasn't just losing her title, she was losing her home. She looked up at me, eyes tired, voice hollow. "You think you won? You think you're the hero here?" I shook my head. "There are no heroes in this story, just consequences." She stared for a long moment and then turned and walked away, dragging the little suitcase behind her until it disappeared into the streetlights. And that was the last time I ever saw her on that cul-de-sac a month later. Her house sold to a retired couple. The neighborhood held a small block party, nothing fancy, just food, music, and laughter. People joked about the shadow imbalance violation. Someone taped the old pink flyers to the snack table as decoration. And every time someone brought up the master key incident, they laughed until their stomachs hurt, for the first time in a very long time. The neighborhood felt like a community again. No more unauthorized inspections, no more glitter-covered threats, no more frantic 911 calls claiming non-compliance emergencies. Just peace. And my truck, still in the driveway, still shining proudly, still completely immune to Karen's imaginary empire. Karen wanted control so badly that she lost everything trying to grasp it. But peace doesn't come from control. It comes from respect. from boundaries, from knowing where authority ends and common sense begins. In the end, Karen didn't just lose her power, she lost the illusion that she ever had any. And the cul-de-sac? Well, it finally became the peaceful neighborhood I always hoped it would be.